in the book of Hebrews, and we've been talking about how Jesus is greater than angels and that put the law into effect. He's better than the priesthood, better than sacrifices. And that kind of preempted, it got us ready for Easter because we were talking about the meaning of it. And then we kind of go into Easter. And within it, there's all these warnings to not fall away. But ultimately, kind of, if you don't want to read, or I guess you could read, I don't think I have a transcript of it. But if you don't want to go back to the last 18 weeks as we got into Hebrews, you can go online, you can watch those to catch up. But really, bottom line is Jesus is better. And so we're going to get into that. And truthfully, sometimes faith can be hard. Sometimes it's easier. Because I think even though sometimes it's hard to live out your faith, it's also easier because I have joy, I have certainty, but actually sometimes when you live, because we do live out this faith thing around people who sometimes don't believe, and sometimes trials and things come our way, and so, but you can have this better way of life, this joy-filled life in spite of the challenges. And we're going to jump into Hebrews chapter 11. Starting in verse 1, it says, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. And we're reading from the New Living Translation today. It says, by faith we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we see did not come from anything that can be seen. Now, when I look at science, I am amazed at life. I am always pointed back to the fact that there is a creator. Now, personally, some of you know, because you know my story, I had a love for both history and science, but I was especially drawn to science when I was younger. And I loved it. In fact, I majored in chemistry in college, which most of you realize, because I'm always doing chemical experiments up here. No, I'm not. But, I majored, chemistry was my major because I wanted to, my goal in life was to split atoms and stuff. I like chemistry where it kind of, chemistry and physics get a little mixed up as to what you're doing. Love that stuff. And then I took these courses in religious studies because I do like history. And again, I have to fill out your electives when you go to college. And so I was kind of taking both. And so I ended up with a double major of chemistry and religious studies, which is the most popular major nowhere. Anyway, but I was always drawn to it. I had, I'm slightly ornery, as my grandmother would say. And I would go into my upper level chemistry classes and I would tell them I was a religious studies major. And they're like, what? I'm like, just studying faith and quantum mechanics. And they'd be like, well, I don't know what you're even talking about. And, I'd go into my upper level, religious studies classes. And, I'd be talking to them. They're like, well, what's your major? Everyone's like, philosophy, all these things. I'm like, chemistry. And they're like, what are you doing in here? So it was fun. But there's not sometimes the conflict that I think some generations and some people put between faith and science. They're compatible because really, science is just looking at this beautiful painting and world that God made and making sense of it. And for me, looking at math, how math can describe a projectile thrown in the air, that's just amazing that we can create math to describe that. And there's order to things. And so when I look at creation, I'm drawn to it. And there are a whole lot of scientists who don't have faith. And there's a whole lot of religious people who don't believe in science. And, Nacho Libre, that famous theological treatise, there's this tension between Nacho Libre and Esquilito. He goes, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. And that's kind of, sometimes maybe you have friends like that. I don't believe in God, I believe in science. But it's really, I've told you to follow this lady before on Twitter. If you're anyone tweeting Twitter and, follow me, I'll follow you back. As long as you tweet. When people follow you and they never tweet, you're like, why am I following you? Anyway, Sarah, and I don't know if I'm getting her name right, Salviander, I have no idea because I've never met her in person. Although, she's like an astrophysicist, specializes in quasars, supermassive and black holes, like all of us do. Anyway, she grew up atheist, but it was her study of creation that kind of drew her to faith. I mean, she grew up making fun of Christians for faith, but that became one. And, she's also a power lifter, I found out. And so, oh my gosh, she likes to pick things up and put things down. We should be friends. Shout out to Sarah, Dr. Salviander. And it's kind of, and so faith, frankly, again, there are Christians who don't understand it. I remember one time there was a sermon this guy preached, and I was in a church and I was young, and he was preaching against how this violated the second law of thermodynamics. I went up to him, that evening. I was like, okay, I don't understand your understanding of the second law of thermodynamics, and why do you feel like this is and he's like, I have no idea what you're even talking about. I just said it because I read it somewhere. And so there's some people who kind of, I think they set up this false, tension, and a lot of people don't understand it. But really, it's something that brings us to faith. There's a guy within our movement, our group of churches, he literally has a PhD in aerospace engineering. He wrote a book called Preaching. Maybe it is rocket science. Because I've got it. I haven't read it, like a lot of books. And so those of you been in my office, you see I have a lot of books I haven't read. A lot of them I have, but I collect books. I think there was like a Japanese word for it. I forget, I posted it one time. To collect books you never read. And then people give me books, and I'm like, oh, it's gonna be great to read. But I would need to lock myself in my office for, a really days and days and weeks and months, but it would be a good time. I'm nerdy. My ideal vacation, I want to someday figure out a way to get out to California or to school and take class for 8 hours a day. They have these intensive classes. That would be such a great vacation, wouldn't it? Said 2 people ever. The nerds in here got me. You're with me. But I love to read. But really, it's not this tension that people kind of made it out to be. And faith is it's not belief in spite of evidence contrary. Faith is based on evidence and experience. A commentator suggests the phrase here, using resolute confidence. So faith is this resolute confidence in God. And we have faith in a lot of things. Now, we talked about, we have pews and chairs here. You know why we have pews and chairs? Because some people like pews, some people chair. We thought about making one side pews, one side chairs. That, for those of you who like balance, that would totally throw you off, right? But we just don't care. People debate about it. Some people like to know where they sit in a chair, and these are comfy, and I don't know. But most of you, when you came in, you sat down either in a pew or chair. Did you test it and check the chair and make No, you just kind of had faith that, I wasn't pulling some giant practical joke on you, and the chair would hold you. We have faith in that. And I was thinking about, planes flying. And it's kind of the world's getting back to normal. I had to fly somewhere recently. And, I had to look this up because it seemed ridiculous. And I looked it up in several different places. I was like, this can't be true. A Boeing 747 weighs about 485,300 pounds when empty. And max takeoff, when you had fuel and all that, is 987,000 pounds. I had to look that up twice. Now, I could be on the wrong Google. That's a lot of weight. But I don't think about a plane. When I get on a plane, I just trust and I have faith that that's going to move, right? Some of you are terrified when you fly. And I sometimes fly next to those people, and I make all kinds of things and make them. No, I don't. I try to be a calming influence on them. Don't talk about the plane crash. I don't go over the weights of planes. Can you believe this thing even flies? But but we have faith. We trust that's going to work because we've seen it work. If you've been down here, you look up, you see the C5s and all that. There's giant monster things. They defy physics, I think, that those things fly. And some of you work on them, so you know what I mean. It's this giant, you gotta trust. We have faith. Now, one time I went to sleep and let a guy with a knife cut me all up. I did, it's a surgeon. Because we have faith, right? We trust that this dude with a knife knows what he's doing. We have faith in so many things, and so we'll have faith in stuff. Everyone's got faith to some degree. And we put our faith in things because our experience shows it to be well-founded. And when you start to begin to trust God, you can see that, you take those little baby steps of faith, and you see that God is faithful. And so we can begin to build our faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4. And we're going to go over a few stories. Now, I contemplated, this is a section, I was even laboring over it yesterday. I'm like, how deep do I go into these stories? And the writer of Hebrews is going to kind of hit some stories. And so I'm going to hit them a little bit because people may not be familiar with them. But the writer of Hebrews kind of assumes you know this story. And you could, this week, if you wanted to like study something, you could go back over some of these stories in the Bible and read. Some of them are kind of short, but some of them are longer. And so there's these stories that he's going to go into. And so it says, it was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. And so, if you don't know the story, Cain and Abel, and the first time you read the story, you're like, I don't know, why was Cain's offering not good? And you know, people have all kinds of theories and different things, but it seems to be, that Cain skimped. He didn't give as much as he was able. Sorry. Made that joke up and waiting all week for that. And so he kind of skimps out on his offering. And in Genesis 4, verse 6, I didn't put this on the screens, but so why are you so angry, the Lord asked Cain? Why do you look so dejected? You will be accepted if you do what is right, but if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. Now, if you don't know the story, if your brother asks you to go hiking in the woods, and he's angry at you, it might not be a good idea. Because we get the first murder we see in the Bible, he kills his brother. And famous line afterwards, God's asking him, hey, where's your brother? And he goes, I don't know, am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you were. And you're trying to keep it on the down low, but God sees everything. He's cursed, he's sent out, there's all kinds of stuff. When I was a youth pastor, I always got all kinds of stories about some of these. I think teens just read Genesis because most of their questions came out of Genesis. So I think in January, they're like, yeah, I'm gonna read the Bible. And then they get Genesis and then they're done. Because Exodus is a cool story. Leviticus, I mean, if you read the book of Leviticus, you will come to Jesus or stop reading. Anyway, I came to faith when I was reading somewhere in Leviticus, I think. Anyway, all good stuff, but probably not the book you want to have with you if you're trapped on a desert island. Anyway, so Cain and Abel, they both become examples of faith. Abel, the way to be faithful. Cain, the way to not be faithful. And everyone's an example. Some are good examples, some are bad examples. And so you're an example of faith one way or another. You get to decide. And Abel's example of faith is that he did right. Even though his sacrifice was a sacrifice. It cost him a little cash, and eventually he cost him his life, but that wasn't his fault. That was Cain's, which is funny because we went to a chicken place called Raising Cane's, and it was, anyone ever go out? It was, I don't know where they're based. We were in Missouri. Josh and I stopped there. I loved it. One, when you pull up to the window, it's not like Chick-fil-A. They're like, how may I help you? They're like, yo, what chicken you want? I loved it. I'm like, these are my people. And all they sell is chicken strips. So some of you are happy. Oh my gosh, and the sauce is really good. Anyway, but I kept thinking, as a Christian, can I go to a place called Cane's? I don't know. Can I get a Cane Corso? They're beautiful dogs. Anyway, where my ADD mind goes. but chapter 11, Hebrews 11, it was by faith that Enoch, or if you wanted to go to Hebrew, Enoch, was taken up to heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him. For before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God. Enoch was a personal hero of mine. I read it, I don't know what, his story kind of captivated me at a younger age. I was just always struck by, it's like a cool but very limited story. Like literally, we're gonna read the whole story in Genesis, and you'll be there. In fact, I loved his name. In fact, when I took modern Hebrew, I took it with this lady. I always called her an Israeli drill sergeant because she was in the army before she became a teacher of college students on Hebrew. And it was interesting because not having grown up in going to Hebrew school and everything, I was a little lost at times. But I chose, we had to choose a Hebrew name. Like when you take a class, you have to do that for Spanish or something. I chose Enoch. And she's like, Enoch, that's an old name. Nobody uses that anymore. Although they do use it in Ethiopia, and I have friends named Enoch. Anyway, shout out, good dude. Anyway, so they gave me Shlomo instead, which I didn't really care for because I was like, do I really look like a Shlomo? Like that didn't seem like, but that's actually Solomon, so that was cool. Like when I found out, okay, anyway. But, I always loved Enoch's. In fact, my first email address, this is how old I am. I'm so old that my first email address was assigned to me by the university that I went to. And I explained what email was. This is in the early 90s. And I'm like, okay, this is great. Now, I don't know anyone else in the world with an email address, but there's this cool new thing called email. I called Denise to go, do you have an email address? There's a little A symbol in the middle of it. And we can send messages, apparently. Anyway, that became one of the ways I contacted her. And so when I chose my first email address when I went to seminary, I was like, I got to choose it, and I was like, Enoch. And then, I remember my mom was, not sure what that was, and her friend's like, oh, it's a eunuch. That's, someone who... Anyway, we're going to keep it PG-13. I stopped using that email address because there was a little confusion. Not the same thing. Enoch, not eunuch. So Enoch, Genesis chapter 5, this is Enoch's whole story. So if you're going to try to read it this week, you can just read it right now on the screen. Then you will have read this one. It says, when Enoch was 65 years old, he became the father of Methuselah. Maybe you've heard that name. After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch lived in close fellowship with God for another 300 years. And he had other sons and daughters. Enoch lived 365 years, walking in close fellowship with God. Then one day he disappeared because God took him. It's kind of cool. You're so close with God. God's like, hey, just come chill with me. And so he just kind of disappears. And really Enoch's example of faith is he gets so close to God in the way he's living that, hey, God just takes him. That's pretty cool. And I imagine he wanted to go. It wasn't like a, alien abduction where people are like, no. It's like God just takes him to be with him because there's that closeness. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. It is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and he rewards those who sincerely seek him. Ultimately, God wants us to live and act in faith. Faith recognizes the now, a reality, but faith looks forward to the future reality. If we need to live and act on what faith we have, because that pleases God. You may not have faith as strong as your neighbor. You may not have faith as strong as your spouse. You may not have faith as strong as your friend, but you act on what you have. You live fully in what you have. And it says here, verse 7, it was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. Now, Noah, if you haven't heard the story, I know a guy who can tell you. Do you need an ark? Because I know a guy. I got all kinds of puns with his name. We tell the story, I remember, when you have little kids, I love bath time because you get to play with toys. Because people frown on it. You can't go to a hot tub when you're my age and have tub toys and stuff in there. It looks a little weird. I guess you can, but people are going to look at you weird. And we have kids sometimes. I think I got kids just so I can play with Legos. Sorry guys, that's what you're here. But you liked it anyway. But I remember the Noah tub toys, and I think we just recently got rid of it because the tornado destroyed our house, and or maybe we still have it in a box somewhere to play with my grandkids someday. But it's we make it into a kid's story, right? It's there's Noah, there's Ark, there's 2 by 2. It's kind of this crazy story of faith. And if you don't know the story, there was a movie a few years ago, and I was going to rewatch the whole thing tomorrow. Sometimes I feel like when I mention a movie, I need to have a disclaimer. I saw this a long time ago, and I don't remember all the details. But there's the story Evan Almighty. And it's kind of like he's become a politician, and suddenly God's calling him to build an ark, and wood is showing up, and one of the translations calls it gopher wood, and so gopher wood shows up. There's all these puns and things in the story. But basically he has to build a giant boat, and people think he's nuts. That's kind of Noah. It wasn't it flooded every year and Noah was building a nice big ark and people were like, yeah, that guy's smart. This is kind of a one-time thing. And so, he's building it. You pick your HOA would be really mad at you because I'm pretty sure they don't allow you to build arks in your HOAs anymore. That's how we know it was a long time ago because HOAs would stop everything now. How long does it take to build it? There's people who have theories and they'll tell you different things because of the text. But I'll tell you, with looking at the text and kind of fleshing it out, I came to this answer. I don't know. Because there's some jumps we make in logic between things. Some people say it was 120 years. I don't know. You didn't have power tools. Some of you, it would take a long time anyway. Maybe it would take you 120 years. But there's some jumps in logic because of the things said. Big thing is, he had to build his boat, and the neighbors were watching. And they're like, you crazy. This is not a normal behavior. But Noah's example of faith is he obeyed God, despite the personal costs, financial. It was a lot of work. There's probably some social costs. I mean, even though he was righteous and his neighbors weren't, they probably, you ever had that neighbor that's weird? Like that, come on. The one that you're just like, oh gosh, when he comes out of his house, you're like, oh man. I'll tell you, if you don't, you might be that neighbor. But this Noah was probably that neighbor, like, oh gosh, the dude's out there building that boat again. What in the world? What's all the gopher wood for? Anyway, but he lives it out. And so he becomes this example of faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed God when he called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. Now, if you know the story of Abraham, he shows up a lot in the Bible. We talk about him, periodically because, big important key figure here. And some of you remember Father Abraham and many sons. I learned that like in Spanish, like Padre Abraham. Anyway, it's kind of all getting slurred and blurry together. But I love doing VBS in like Mexico. It was a lot of fun. I need to go back just to do VBS in Mexico and then the kids all ride you around the thing. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, but Abraham, this big figure of faith, and his father Terah, not Terah the girl's name, but Terah the dude's name, started off on a journey from Ur to Canaan, and he stops in Haran. They limited maps, but picture even that. Because he kind of stops, and there's a lot said to what happens there and everything, but not so much in the Bible. There's other stories outside of the Bible about it. But, there's kind of limited maps. He just kind of takes off. And so Abraham sort of jumps into this, and, he couldn't hit Google Street View. Like, anyone else do that? You're going somewhere in the city. I Google Street View to figure out where I can park because I'm like, man, I got to get there. Is there a parking lot? What do I need? Do I need cash? And now it's like even more complicated because lots that used to take cash only take credit or some certain app you got to have. So I'm like downloading the apps I need. But there's no Google Maps. There was just Go Maps. Like, go there. Well, the legend was right. There is people here who want to kill me. Because, you're not always sure how, the Middle East had this culture of hospitality, but sometimes that didn't work out, right? And if you study history, people are often not kind to people who come from somewhere else. People are often kind when people don't look quite like them. People are wicked and whacked. They're wickety, wickety, whack. And he lives in a tent. He didn't have, that sounds cool. Like, I love to backpack. I love to camp. I love to be in a tent. I sometimes go to these meetings and like the other pastors think I'm nuts. I'm pretty sure. Sometimes they come down just to see. I sleep in a hammock. I'm cool with that. I got a house the rest of the year. So when I go to my meetings, I cook coffee over a fire. I sleep in a hammock. They have a bathhouse and everything down there, so I can still shower. That's not why people are looking at me. But I like it. But to live in a tent permanently is like another kind of thing, right? And some of you have been in the military. You're probably not like, oh boy, can't wait to live in a tent again. No, you're like, I got out of the military because I was tired of tent. And you have to move your tent. But he's homeless basically. And he lives his whole life that way. The only piece of property Abraham owns, if you read the story, and there's a lot of stories about him in Genesis there. You ever know what one piece of property he owns? Anyone know? Yeah, he buys a place to bury his wife. That's it. But he lives on this promise and he lives in a faithful way because it's pointing to this promise. So he's homeless, lives in a tent. The only thing he really owns is a grave for his wife. But he's one of the highest examples of faith in the Bible because he believes God and acts and lives accordingly. Verse 11 says, it was by faith that even Sarah, when she was able to have a child, though she was barren and was too old, she believed that God would keep his promise. And as a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead, a nation with so many people like that, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there is no way to count them. And so if you know the story of Abraham and Sarah, they're promised that they would be blessed by God. Problem is, he had no kids. And if you read the story, they take things into their own hands, and he sleeps with Hagar, and he has a kid by them, and God's like, nah, that ain't how it's going down. And so Abraham is 100, Sarah's 90. That ship has sailed. Like I never, when I go sometimes to retirement home things when I'm asked to go visit people and everything, and I love it, enjoy it, meet some people, but I've yet to see one of the residents pregnant, right? Like that's not a normal thing. Like that ship has sailed. Like you try your 20s and 30s usually, maybe 40s, maybe even 50s, but you're not like, hey, I'm 90, I think I'm gonna sit down and start a family. Like this is not a normal thing, right? And so, but she was there, and then like they said, oh, you're gonna have a baby. She laughs. She's kind of denying it. She's like, no, I didn't laugh. You laughed. And then eventually she has a son. His name's Isaac, which means he laughs because it's funny. But because God did it, they kind of believed, but still there was like, and God blessed him with a son at his old age, and God's promise is worth the wait. Right? They try to do things their own way. Yeah, they cause a little tension, problems even to today. Abraham and Sarah's example of faith, they stumbled in their faith. They took their things in their own hands, but ultimately, right, they obey God. And there's blessings for it. And it doesn't matter how old you are, how often you failed, your story is still being written. And God's not done with you. So maybe, Easter is this time, people all come to church. Some of you are, all with us online. We kind of pack the house out usually on Easter. And people are, you kind of come Christmas and Easter. I get it, and we appreciate you. We're not, but some people come and they kind of feel guilty because the rest of the year they kind of messed up. They know it. But God's not done with you. God's not done just because we mess up a bit. Now, we do want to get better. We do want to mess up less. We do want to live that life of faith. But God's not done just because, you laugh. Just because you don't do things right. And so that's the grace of God. And here's verse 13. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. I like that they saw it at a distance. It's like you kind of have this idea of what God's doing, where he's going, but we don't always see that fulfillment here, right? God has promises and things that ultimately are only fulfilled in him. Like we want it all now. We're Americans. I have a love-hate relationship with #blessed because I think Americans sometimes, they see #blessed and they think, I got a new truck. Now that is a blessing, but that's not blessed. Blessed is the fact that we're adopted into the kingdom of God. We're adopted as, as joint heirs with Christ, that we have this new way of living. The Holy Spirit comes and lives inside us. We can live this different way. #blessed is a life of faith. Those are blessings that come along. They're not bad. Like I like to enjoy the ride while we're here, but those things aren't the things, right? That's not what faith is. It's not about what I get in this world, but it's about living for God and his promises. Again, not a bad thing. If I could choose, #blessings and stuff over not stuff, I'll take the stuff. Although the stuff sometimes has a way of becoming the things we want and desire. And, often, and we've talked about this, do you have wealth or does the wealth have you? Whole nother sermon there we're not going to get into. It says this, faith is really, Abraham and Sarah died not seeing his descendants as would be as many stars in the sky. But faith, again, is this resolute confidence that God will do it, even when we don't see it. And sometimes, when we don't see it in our lifetime. Verse 14 says, obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. They have longed for the country they came from. They could have gone back. But they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. And that is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Now, I was a youth pastor for years. I loved it. Kids are knuckleheads, but it's okay. But it was fun. But, often, my fellow youth pastors, I'm sure I never did this, but we often lay people on this guilt trip, don't be ashamed of God in front of your friends. And, Anyway, not all bad. But here's the thing: God, you don't want God to be ashamed of you. That's the bigger thing than you being ashamed of God, which is a whole nother conversation. But we say don't be ashamed of God. At work, at school, family, true. But we need to be concerned if God is ashamed of us. It says, but that is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. When you live in faith, God's not ashamed. 1 Peter 2:11, we did 1 Peter a while back. Man, that was a good book. And the sequel, 2 Peter, was good too, right? It's not a trilogy, though. 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, we got a trilogy. Anyway, dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from the worldly desires that wage war against your very souls. I love that temporary residents and foreigners, because your interactions are different when you don't live there, right? Now, before COVID, and I traveled more, and I get the pleasure of going to preach in Africa and teach there a lot, and it's like I love it there. And I stay in the same apartment. Sometimes I want to fix things, they won't let me. But generally, like when you fly or you go somewhere and you're staying in a hotel, and like it's a little leaky. Because especially if you don't stay in the nice hotel, maybe the it's not insulated well, the windows aren't caulked. Do you go out to like Lowe's or Home Depot or Ace Hardware and get some caulking and caulk the windows? Do you go like get rolls of insulation, do some stuff, and get foam? Maybe if you do, you probably have a problem. But most of us don't, because it's just a temporary thing, right? Like, I just turn up the AC or turn down the, whichever it needs, and I just kind of like, they ought to work on that, that's no problem. Because it's temporary. Now, I used to fly a bit more again before, COVID and pandemic, and, I've never gotten on a plane and thought, man, this is where I stay. I've never like put up curtains and like brought in potted plants and like modified things. You kind of get situated and comfortable, but you get situated and comfortable depending on how long you're going to be on that plane. Now, sometimes I'm on a plane for like 17 hours or more, so you get a little different comfortable, but you're not building stuff. You might put your jacket over the window if it's too sunny, but you're not settling in. Why? Because you don't live there. And ultimately, this world is not our home. Sometimes we're so concerned with the comfort of this that we forget that this is not the focus. Now, when I do, I love to teach in East Africa, and most of I go there and I teach graduate students, and they're awesome students. They do all kinds of things. I had another friend requested me the other day. I'm like, 'cause I love to hear what they're doing. I love to see what they're doing, because they go places I could never go and do things. And God's given me a very particular set of skills, which I've honed over a lifetime to teach people about the Bible. And so I love doing that. But here's the thing. If you ever fly, and especially international, I always say, coach to Africa. It's the only way to go. Because I'm absolutely miserable, often for long periods of time. I think my shortest flight is like 12 or 13 hours usually. And it's miserable, because it's miserable. And I'm thrifty. And so I will never pay for the first class. I always look at the price, but it's always like triple, 4 times more. So I'm always like, coach to Africa, only way to go. But here's the thing: if you've never flown coach, some of you, that's awesome. But like when they like parade you through, it's the parade of shame. You walk through the first class. It's like they just want to tell you, hey, poor people, look what the nice people with money get. And you're looking down, there's like an 8-year-old in a seat that's 3 times the size of them, and I'm about to go to sit in a seat that's half my size for 13 hours. And they kind of make you wish, and then like, hear guys, like random people like, I need to learn to fly like that. People are aspiring. It's okay, we're capitalists in America, But here's the thing: if I could fly first class and then stay in a terrible motel, or I had the option of flying coach and staying in a 5-star resort, which would you choose? You'd probably stay for the 5-star, unless it was like an hour, But because your longer period of time is spent at the destination. And see, a lot of times in America, we have this backwards, because we're so concerned about this life we're living. This is just a flight home. It's okay to enjoy things. I like to enjoy things. Life can be fun. I laugh a lot. I get criticized by people because I laugh. You know what? I think Jesus would have laughed. There's jokes you don't get because you don't read Hebrew that are in the Old Testament. There's a lot of funny stuff. Jesus speaks with hyperbole because it's funny and it sticks in your head. And I have a certain level of joy because I follow Jesus. I'm not, bound up in like thinking I'm too serious. No. Anyway, but if you've stayed here long enough, you know I laugh, right? Because things are funny. And life can be fun. I enjoy it because we have joy. But that's not the focus. The focus is not, just having fun in this life. People are always, YOLO, that was the thing back in the day, I remember. You remember YOLO? And it's like, yeah, YOLO and then the judgment. YOLO and then your eternal reward. And so YOLO can mean I just want to enjoy this life and the flight there. Or YOLO can mean I'll suck it up because the destination is greater. And so the way we live matters. I'll tell you, I have a lot of business books. I have a whole section of business books I probably ought to just push off and throw into a dumpster. I've read so many books, but I'm always afraid I'm gonna hey, remember that one time I read that one book and there was this one piece in there? And that happens to me all the time. That's why I can't get rid of books. They're like, it's kind of reading a book is a funny thing. You read a book, then you put it on a shelf, and most of us never touch it again. But if I ever need that book again, some of you, anyone got that sickness? Anyway, but one of the books I read when I was young that I still think is just a great business book is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the habits is begin with the end in mind. And so we have to live life with the end in mind. Now, again, it doesn't mean we don't enjoy things. It doesn't mean we don't make things look pretty. It doesn't mean we don't spend time painting and working on the church building and things like that. But our focus is not on the journey. Our focus is on the destination. We're going someplace. Life of faith means living with the end in mind, not just the trip to the end. We'll live purposeful lives when we understand what God is calling us to. We really live life. To live as a believer and a follower of Jesus is this life with dual citizenship, because we have responsibilities here, right? Like if you're going to be a good, faithful follower of Jesus, you need to pay your taxes. You need to keep your lawn looking nice so the neighbors don't hate you. You need to you need to work, vote, pay taxes. That's okay. And you need to enjoy, I do believe we're made to enjoy life. It is a gift from God. And I thought I had fun before, but when I became a believer and follower of Jesus, I just have a joy in a way I didn't have before. I joked and laughed before, but it was kind of hiding some pain too. But I joke and laugh now because I have joy in the way I'm living. I have joy in the way God's created me to live. And I love my kids. I love going to their sports stuff. Dyers do a lot of sports. I think that's the only thing we do. I love going to the games, especially with my +1. Shout out. That's Denise, for those who don't know what your +1 is. Anyway, that's my +1, not your +1. Anyway, now, see, my feet are here in Delaware. I love Delaware. It's funny because people who know I'm from here, they know I love Delaware. I love Delaware history. I grew up, we got maps to tell you who lived here when, and I love the history of this building. I've read the history of this building. And then you get in here and you start working on this building and you see, okay, well, that's why they added on at some point. And they just thought, well, we'll just throw more ducts in there instead of fixing the HVAC. Anyway, I love Delaware, but my heart belongs to God. This is just a place I'm passing through. It's where God planted me. I will love it while I'm here. If God called me somewhere else, I'd go there too. And I would love that. I love where my feet are, but my heart really belongs to God. And we have to live lightly in this world, ultimately looking to that. Which is why, again, I could be at peace no matter who wins an election. I laugh every election year. We watch it, we're just like spectators. We get popcorn and stuff. We watch the elections. And don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's going to affect me. It's not going to affect me. Bottom line is, in the end, none of it's going to affect me because my heart isn't here. My heart is my home. A couple of memes I pulled down through my notes. It's funny. My note taking has changed. When I started preaching, it was handwritten notes and everything. And then at some point, I went to printed notes, and now it's in an iPad, and then like Word and things became possible to throw in like memes and stuff. So I got memes and emojis throughout my notes now, which is just funny to me. Anyway, 2 memes I pulled down. God has your back, trust him. A friend of mine posted that. I'm like, yeah, God got your back like a chiropractor. You got to. That's stolen out of like an 80s or early 90s rap song, Christian rap song. Anyway, but he does. He got your back like a chiropractor. But and then another one I saw a while ago says, "I trust the next chapter because I know the author." And so you can live when you put your faith and trust in God. You can live differently in this world because we know who we trust. I know, and we follow Jesus, we're God's holy people. We hold to our convictions and values as followers of Jesus. And there's times when, we're going to suffer unjustly. Sometimes it's not what people think. It's not just having someone not like you. And I think we haven't had a level of persecution and thing. With America, we think we're persecuted because, our neighbor's like, oh, I'm so persecuted. Go around the world, see what happens. It's a whole different world. And so, but again, we live differently. So I was it last week? I think last week. A friend came down. We were getting lunch and everything. He just wanted to kind of like chat, hang out, and talk a little bit. And so we walked over to. I still call it Wits. You all can't call it Camden, Wyoming Deli. You can tell how long someone's been here by what they call it sometimes. And, I met some guys like telling them Wits. I was like, oh, wait, Camden, Wyoming Deli. You need to Google that, not Wits. I don't know if Wits comes up anymore. But I remember, and my dad's like, I think you said it was like Frank's before that. It was like, my dad could be like, oh yeah, Frank's. And you're like, I don't know what that is. Anyway, that was before the Witt brothers kind of bought it over. It's been there for a while. Anyway, Great Deal Store closed on Sundays now. It used to be open on Sundays. And I remember we grew up in church. I'd go to church and we'd go over and we would get ham and cheese. I don't know why ham on Sunday. Anyway, we'd get the sliced ham and we'd make sandwiches and we'd be at my grandmother's house and then we seemed to stay there forever. And when you're a kid, you just like, oh gosh, I just want to go home to my home. Anyway, but I learned to enjoy sitting in the chair, watching the TV, which you had to change with your hands and everything. But they did eventually have a remote. That was cool. But there was nothing on because it was Sunday afternoon. And it was like black and white TV was about the only thing on Sunday afternoons. Because this was like pre-cable. Or maybe I didn't know about cable growing up because we didn't have it. No one did. I guess, the rich folk had the cable, y'all. Anyway, but paint this picture of the story. But I remember, all this to say, do you remember, like, Abbott and Costello? I remember watching that. And I remember watching Who's on First. Remember? What's on second? I don't know. Third base. Today, tomorrow, I remember this whole thing. Here's the thing. Who's on first? I don't know. Third base. The question is, who is first? Not who's on first. But are we putting God first in our lives? Because everything else then orders around that. And when we put God first, things get better. And and when we live, it changes the way we live. I mentioned this before. I had a tie. We would go over it because Josh has to wear ties and stuff now. So he's usually rating my ties the night before, and we're trying to and I'm trying to teach him to tie a tie. Anyone here know how to tie a tie? Any here dude not know how to tie a tie? Be honest. You got a clip on. It's okay. Because we don't wear them a lot. I keep mine tied for, once they're tied, they're just tied. Unless I get something on them, got to clean them or something. But I have this one tie, and it's like all these colorful fish going one way. The Christian fish, the little white thing, is going the other way. And I like that as sort of this image. And I don't wear the tie very often because I don't wear ties very often. But, it's kind of, because sometimes we go the opposite way. And there's times when, if you put God first, you'll have to live in a way that can be uncomfortable. I think one of the practices in the ancient Rome that's the craziest is, you would have a baby and you didn't want it. It was unhealthy, deformed, we're sure who the dad was. You just there was either a place outside you could leave it, or you just put it outside the city gates. Doesn't that sound crazy? I know, and this is like historically accurate stuff. And someone could pick it up, you need a slave, raise the baby, you want a playmate for a rich kid? Oh, we just had a baby, we need a playmate. Or it just gets eaten by wild dogs. That was ancient Rome. Yeah, we think of Rome as civilized. They weren't. They're barbaric in many ways. But here's the thing, Christians come along, and they're like, hey, there's value in life. And so they start taking the kids in, they care for them. And so there's a cost to living counterculturally. Not everything we do will be countercultural, but if you're gonna be a believer and follower of Jesus, there's times when we have to live in distinction from the culture because of what is right. And ultimately, that's what Jesus wants from us. Matthew 5:16, Jesus said, in the same way, let your good deeds shine for all to see so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. We live in a different way because that shows people who Jesus is. James 3:13, if you're wise, this is true like James, if you're wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with humility that comes from wisdom. So much, and this is the funny thing about faith. We are not made right with God by how we live. Like, it's purely by faith. I come to Christ. I was repentant. I said, God, do with my life what you want. I'm sorry. God forgives me, gives me this new life. But it then changes the way you live. You're not made right with God by what you do. But when you're made right with God, you will change your behavior. Your life changes. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes there's some setbacks. But we live differently because the Holy Spirit comes and lives inside of us. The Holy Spirit cleans us. And we often say it's like two pedals of a bike. I got to do my side. Holy Spirit does his. God cleans you up. But then you live differently. And so Easter, you can come in and say he is risen. All you want. But if you don't live like he's risen, is he really risen to you? Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, all these examples of faith to emulate. But ultimately, Jesus calls us into a relationship, and our lives should then speak what we believe before we ever speak it. It's been said, actions speak louder than words. Live your life well. In a world of hypocrites and hypocritical Christians, because we see enough of that in the news too, people who call themselves believers and they don't live like it. Drives me nuts. Throat punch for Jesus. So one of the most evangelistic things we can do is live out our faith, right? In a world that often doesn't know righteousness, we need to be examples of what godliness looks like. And faith isn't this giant leap into the unknown. I picture it was Armstrong, right, who steps on the moon first, and one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And I think sometimes we picture faith like that. We take this little step of faith, and then it's like we have to launch into nowhere. And that's scary. But I think faith is more like lots of little steps, and the steps start getting bigger. Kind of like when you're little, you learn to walk, and it's cute, and your little feet go, it's kind of cute. Next thing you know, the kid's sprinting across the room, and then they become big, gangly teenagers, and they're moving bigger steps, unless they break their ankle or some. But and so faith is these small steps that God will use to prepare you for the bigger ones. The first step of faith is just, hey, God exists. That's a step of faith. You have to look at the data in the world and go, either God exists or God doesn't. That tree just happened, by chance, and we can do the math and be surprised. It's crazy, but this tree just shows up. Is there a God who's there? And then it's like, you start to look at the biblical God and go, hey, I think this is the God. And so, believing God exists, and then ask him to reveal himself to you. Because God will show up. God will show you who he is. And then because we do that, we begin to live his ways. We begin to see that it's a better way of life. And it's these little steps of faith that'll lead you into a walk of faith and a changed life. Live what you know now, and then your faith will increase as you see God move and change your life. Ultimately, faith in God centers us in this crazy world. It keeps us on the path. because we have this destination he's bringing us to. And life comes against you sometimes. I know people like to hear everything's great and perfect and your life's going to be blessed. And, if you follow God, everything kind of falls and your ducks fall into line. That's great. My ducks are all over the place. They need a duck house or something to pull them together. Some of my ducks have been shot. I don't know. But it's, when you follow and you live this life of faith, even when things get crazy, even when life isn't how you planned it to be, or even sometimes in the midst when things are going well, the ultimate center of our faith is Jesus will have a peace and be able to live in a way that's different because of our faith in him.